Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the webinar on 7 strategies to deal with hecklers when you're public speaking, and that could be when you're training, when you're facilitating, even when you're running a meeting. How do you deal with hecklers? One of my workshop attendees sent me this question a while back, so I thought I would put together a short webinar. So welcome. Peter Dew's my name, and I'm a public speaking trainer and coach, and I love to help people find their voice so they can share their messages, their ideas confidently and effectively. How do you participate in a webinar? There's a few new names that I haven't seen before, so I'll briefly run through this for you. Please ask questions as we go. Don't wait for me to say, does that make sense? Ask questions, and not only questions, make remarks or comments, or put in your own situations. How would you deal with it? Take notes as we go, but remember this webinar will be recorded, and you will have the webinar recording sent to you. So if I speak too fast, gloss over content, and you don't get time to take notes, remember you can review the webinar. Participate as we go and think. In terms of thinking, I mean apply this knowledge, this learning to your own situation. Cast your mind back. When did you not deal well with a heckler? When did you have someone angry in your workshop who kept causing you concern via difficult questions or interruptions? Or do you have a difficult presentation coming up where you're worried about hecklers? Which of these skills will you use to be more effective? So I can talk to you, I can give you information, but what's valuable is what you work out that you can incorporate into your own public speaking, training, facilitation style. I just want to put a framework around this webinar. I'm not going to talk about how do you deal with hecklers at union rallies or big community protests. So this is for the seminar, the keynote speech, the presentation, the workshop. Those really big ones we see on TV, the protests and the placards, that's a different situation to what I'm going to talk about today. So I just want to get that clear. So these are the 7 steps, and I'll go through them one by one. How do you prepare? One idea is to praise them, thank them for their contribution, find some point of agreement. If you were to talk to my wife Violet about negotiation, about conflict resolution, about having difficult conversations, you need to come from a position of finding common ground. You can anticipate tricky questions. Those objections, sometimes you just cannot deal with that objection. You cannot deal with that heckler there and then. So you need to get back to them, or maybe agree to discuss after, agree to discuss later on. And another way is to involve them. Don't involve them to humiliate them, but involve them to explore and find the message that you're going to share with them. So they're the 7 steps. So first of all, your preparation is important. Set some ground rules around your presentation, around your training. An example is if you're anticipating hecklers, let's allow 1 question per person. So thank you everyone for coming today. I have a lot of information that I wish to cover, and I've only got a short amount of time for questions. So to make it most efficient and give everybody a good opportunity for questions, can I please ask that you limit your questions to 1 question per person? I will see the visible nod within the audience because I want to give as many people a chance as I can. Now, if you have a question that I don't cover, please send me an email and I will respond to that question out of session. I've got the nod, I've got the buy-in with the audience. I've set the rules around how I'm going to deal with this question. Now, if one person keeps asking questions, if one person keeps challenging me, I can quietly and respectfully shut them down. Look, thanks. I appreciate you've got a lot of questions. We did agree up front, 1 question per person. Please send me an email with your additional questions. I've got further questions over here. If you shut someone down, having not set those rules up front, it may be seen as being evasive or disrespectful. Look, I don't want to take any more questions from you, so please, I need to move on. If I announce that midway through, well, people are going to say, well, hang on, why is Peter all of a sudden not taking questions? If up the front, the ground rules are 1 question per person, so I can cover as many different people's questions as possible, then everyone understands when I shut you down. Prepare responses for potential questions and opposing points of view. This is also known as handling objections. I was going to talk about that later on. But when you're talking about information, let's say it's controversial, let's say you're downsizing, you're reducing funding, let's say that you're going to deliver bad news, you know what people are going to say. So do that preparation. It's called environmental scanning. And as I said with the nod, get agreement up front for the ground rules. Another ground rule might be, I'm here for 30 minutes, I'm going to speak for 20 minutes, and I'm going to open up for 10 minutes for questions. Can I get you to all save your questions until the end? Get the nod. Can you all save your questions to the end? Then I'll cover as many questions as I can. Then someone interrupts 5 minutes in, you can say, look, please, excuse me, can you hold that question towards the end? So what rules are you going to set? And I have a question. What if you want to shut down a heckler, but there are no other questions from other people to focus on? So hang on to that question, Ava. There will be other ways of shutting a heckler down. So there's no other questions, and this person has a further question. That doesn't necessarily make him a heckler because he's asking additional questions, but I would use one of the other strategies. If it is hecklers, if it is really causing you grief, there are other ways to control them and mitigate or minimize the effect they're having. Now, bear in mind, one of the things that we can do for Q&A around setting the rules is the scope of the questions. So what I talk about is do a framework. So what are you here to talk about? I'm going to talk about this and this and this. I'm unable to talk about this. I cannot talk about this, and this is outside of scope. I already did this in my introduction. I can't talk about union rallies. I can't talk about protests. I'm talking about within workshops. So I'm here today to talk to you about a new policy and procedure, and this will have financial impact on you. I cannot talk about your budgets, the finance, or how you're going to be able to manage this financially. If you have concerns or questions around that area, then you need to go to finance. You need to go to the director of treasury, whatever it is. So if the heckler is asking questions outside of scope, once again, you can bring them back to the fact that, look, thanks for your questions. I did outline in my introduction, I'm not here to talk about that. That is outside of the scope of this presentation. This is what I'm here to talk about. Do you have any questions relating to my topic? Now, this is not media training, by the way. Journalists will ask questions outside of scope. One minister will announce fantastic funding for a new train line from Brisbane down to Sydney, down to Melbourne, and the first question the journalist asks is, so what are you doing about the boat people on Christmas Island? What are you doing about Manus Island? A question outside of scope of what the press conference and the story that the minister is trying to speak about. If it if the heckler keeps asking you questions within scope, they're valid questions, then you should deal with them. If they're heckling you and it's outside of scope, then you've kind of got permission to shut them down. There are a few other strategies that I'll talk about as we move on. So thanks for that question, Ava. Praise them. Sometimes hecklers come up with alternate points of view. And one of the ways I start a presentation is by being contentious. I actually start my presentation by saying something that I know is going to raise the heckles within the room. Something controversial that I don't necessarily agree with, but that statement or that quote or that data will just get people thinking. And then I can step in and give them the solutions and expand or unpack what I'm talking about a little bit further. So when someone comes up with an idea that disagrees with you, then thank them and praise them for that way of thinking. Stand confidently when you're being heckled. So one of the things, your nonverbal communication, you've probably all heard of the TED Talk by Amy Cuddy about your body language determines who you are. So while you're being heckled, while you're under fire, difficult questions, your physiology, your breathing, your nonverbal communication needs to show that you're calm and collected. Keep breathing. So one of the things that my wife talks about with difficult conversations is you need to be able to remain calm while under fire. So how can you weave in what they've said? And be wary of the yes, but. Yes, that's a great idea, but. Straight away, I've taken the validity out of what you've said. That's a really good point that you've made. However, did you know? Once again, I've undercut you. The and word is so more effective. That's a really great idea. That's a really good point. And I've also found that this is an effective way, and this has less cost, this has less burnout and less staff stress, and this is why I'm proposing that this is the way we move forward with our mental health first aid. But thanks for your great idea. So can you weave in what they've said, but add on to it and then put your own evidence as to why you're proposing this particular angle or this change process or this way of doing things. Find some point of agreement. With conflict resolution, with negotiation, with difficult conversations, if you have win-lose, you very rarely find a successful negotiation or conflict resolution. There needs to be some sort of win-win. So what is that common ground? And as you're proposing a way forward, a policy for solving a problem, and you get hecklers saying, but this is a stupid idea, then maybe we need to step back and find what's the common ground. But so do we agree we have to do something? Do we agree that doing nothing is making a decision to keep the status quo and this problem will keep escalating? Can we all agree on that? All right, so we have agreed that it's a problem. Let me just put forward to you one solution that I think will work. So find the common ground. What is the lowest common denominator? And then build on that. And some aspects we may need to agree to disagree on the other grounds. So find the common ground, agree on that. You may have to step down or find a bigger, a lower common denominator. So doing nothing is not acceptable. Yeah, we need to do something. This is a problem. I just think you're doing it the wrong way. All right, thanks. At least we agree we need to do something. And while I understand you don't agree with what I'm saying, allow me to give you a little bit more evidence, a little bit more information, and then we'll see how we go. And we may have to agree to disagree on the way forward, but at least we do agree on the common ground. So find some point of agreement. If there's no point of agreement, then you have a really hard gig. As an example, I've done some work for the Department of Mines and Petroleum here in Western Australia. And they have to go to community organisations, community groups, and talk about fracking, coal seam gas. It's in the newspaper at the moment. Mark McGowan, our Premier of West Australia, is talking about allowing fracking in some parts of Western Australia. So in a farming community, a wheat belt town such as Eneabba or Three Springs, they are against fracking. So if you're asked to go and speak at a town hall, a community group, the community of Three Springs or somewhere similar, you're going to have a room full of people who are against fracking. You know they're against fracking, and you're there representing the Department of Mines and Petroleum and ultimately the Minister for Minerals and Petroleum, but you know you can't win. So this is where you have to remain calm and confident under fire, and you know that you're not going to be able to persuade them. The best you can do is answer their questions and dispel some of the myths and not take it personally. So it may be you cannot find common ground when you go to speak about fracking, coal seam gas mining, and you have a room of farmers who are worried about their farms, their livelihoods. You just have to accept that. But you know it before, and that's part of your preparation. Who's going to be in the room? Anticipate tricky questions. So the fracking, Three Springs and Eneabba, this is exactly where you would walk in your audience's footsteps first to understand their point of view. So if you're a farmer, a wheat farmer, and you're worried about your water quality and your viable farming land being destroyed by this process of mining or fracking. So having anticipated that, how do you handle these objections? Walk in their footsteps, anticipate the questions. You're reducing funding, you're downsizing, you're asking people to reorganize departments, you're asking them to take on additional tasks, additional duties over and above what they normally do. You're rewriting their job descriptions. You know the questions, the objections they're going to ask you. Prepare questions for this. This is called prepared spontaneity. So it looks like you're spontaneous, it looks like it's off the cuff, but you've kind of anticipated, excuse my writing with a mouse, prepared spontaneity. And it's having those questions. I cannot spell prepared spontaneity. Anticipate. Walk in their shoes. Even if we go away from hecklers, you know that when you go to a networking event, you're going to a seminar, you're going to a barbecue, you're going to a lunch and learn, people are going to ask you, so what do you do, Kerry? What do you do, Zoe? What do you do, Marin? What do you do, Amanda? And I've just been heckled about spell checking. I should have anticipated spelling planned spontaneity. Good point. So there's my heckler. Yeah, so it's about knowing when you walk into a room what's going to happen to you. So what do you do, Stephen? What do you do, Sarah? While this may seem like, oh, I've now got to respond spontaneously, most of you've got that elevator pitch, that elevator speech, that 60 to 30 seconds that rolls off your tongue. That's planned or prepared spontaneity. Get back to them. Sometimes you need to get back to them. You cannot respond. It's maybe valid, maybe it's statistical, maybe it's data, maybe it's about a report, an obscure report they've read in the New York Times. I just read in the New York Times today that coal seam gas is in fact the safest way of extracting gas. And you haven't heard of this, you haven't read it. Look, that's a really good point. I cannot elaborate. I can't comment. Let me get back to you within 48 hours. But if you get back to one individual, the other people may be left wanting, left in anticipation. Oh, yes, I would like to know the answer. So if you do get back to one person who asks a question or who raises a point that you feel you cannot deal with, get back to everyone. If you're going to take it on notice, get back to everyone, please, not just the person who asked that question. And sometimes we have to discuss out after the presentation. It's outside of scope. It's not within what I set in my rules up front, what I want to talk about. And I need to have a chat with this person sort of one-on-one or take it outside the room. One of the things I talk about is nonverbal communication. So if you have a person who is heckling you or asking you questions or keeps coming back to a point and everyone else in the room nods their head up and down, good point, Peter, really good point. The group dynamic has indicated to you, you need to deal with this. So I wouldn't shut them down with a whole room of people nodding their head up and down. So for the fracking example, in a community town hall, everyone's probably nodding, yeah, the water's going to be destroyed. It's going to be contaminated with oil from coal seam gas. It's really bad. Everyone's nodding. So while you don't have the answer, you need to take that on notice and you need to deal with it. If the person is a genuine heckler and is breaking your rules up front, you'll see everyone else in the room going, nah. They roll their eyes, oh, damn, here we go again. And you've got permission from the rest of the room to actually shut that person down respectfully. Look, your question's a little bit niche. I'm just noticing that not everyone's interested in this. Let's have a chat with this later on. Let me talk to you in the morning tea break. And this is really important if someone raises, and the reverse of heckling perhaps, raises a personal issue that is maybe to deal with mental well-being, maybe of a private nature, then maybe we need to take this offline. Let's have a chat about that over morning tea. And once again, this response, I'd like to have a chat with you one-on-one at morning tea or at lunch, should be a planned, spontaneous response. It shouldn't catch you off guard. Oh, wow, this is really controversial. I need to be careful here what I say. And then all of a sudden your nonverbal communication gives away that you're a little bit stressed and you're no longer calm under fire. So one of the key things to being in control under fire from hecklers is remaining calm, looking confident, breathing low, not reacting non-verbally. Inside, you might have knots and all sorts of things happening in your stomach, but don't let that show outwardly. And one of the ways to do this is to have those prepared scripts that make you look good even though you're under fire. So thanks for that, for the heckle around my spelling. Thanks for that, Kerry. Involve them. Include their comments or suggestions into the discussion. That's a really good point, Kerry. And in fact, I will do a spell check for my future presentations. I'm so glad you raised that. Now let's get back to the key topic here, which is how do you deal with hecklers? One thing that I've done, I often teach with nonverbal communication the importance of 2-point and 3-point communication. 2 points when I look at you, 3 points when I go to a PowerPoint slide, to a piece of paper, to a flip chart. Michael Grinder, the great Michael Grinder, teaches that generally we do positive stuff with 2-point, and negative is better handled, giving negative feedback when you go to a 3rd point. You show them a report, you show them some information, and you get them to look at it. So this is the problem I want to deal with. This is the problem I want to talk about. It preserves the relationship. It enables us to keep breathing. And one person said, Peter, that's a load of rubbish. He was a mining engineer. He said, if I don't make eye contact when I'm giving someone bad news, it means that I'm sort of being a little bit frightened. I'm not being assertive. I'm not being confident. I need to look them in the eye and say, what you've done is not right. You've stuffed up. I said, look, would you mind coming up the front? So I brought him up the front, and we just did some role plays around pathology results. And I gave him a diagnosis of a very low white count, and that he probably had acute myeloid leukemia, and this is really hard to treat, and 50% of people with AML may die. I did it twice, looking him straight in the eyes, and then I put a piece of paper with his pathology results and got him to look at it, and he said, wow, when you look at me, I feel really, really bad as you're giving me that bad news. So sometimes involve them, include their comments, just to demonstrate. So another way. So Ava, your original comment around what if they're the only person asking questions and they're heckling you? What are the other things you can do that I've discussed so far? So there's 7 strategies. As I said, apply them to your own situation. Preparation is important. Praise them. Find some point of agreement, some common ground. Anticipate tricky questions. Planned spontaneity that I can't spell. Get back to them. Take it on notice. Our politicians take questions on notice. Agree to discuss after the presentation. Take it out of the room. Involve them. Get them involved. If there's any last questions, please type them in. I've got a range of workshops at the end of this year down in Bunbury, and then early in January in Perth, over to Melbourne in March. I don't have particular dates yet, but I've got a key client bringing me over. Next webinar is, in fact, on Tuesday, 6 ways to be more engaging as a speaker. Feel free to share this information with any of your connections. And once again, I'm going to ask you, it's not about the webinar, it's about what are you going to take away? How are you going to do this? Ava, which step, well, thinking of that person, you asked me the question, how might you use one of these strategies to deal with them? No one else is asking questions. Is it a valid question? Is it within scope? Is it outside scope? Do you need to get back to them? Do you need to agree? Do you need to take the discussion outside of the room because it's off topic a little bit? So once again, thanks for your participation. Glad you like the 30-minute format. It's a little bit rushed. I try to ram stuff in. Ask me questions afterwards. You've got my email. Here's my details. Follow me on Facebook or LinkedIn. And remember, the next time you get a heckler, remain calm, remain confident while under fire, and use one of those strategies to better deal with your hecklers. Bye for now.